Hi guys, welcome to this episode of What the Growth. Today we have Sudharshan Raman with us, who is the CEO and co-founder of Phasio. So Raman, thanks a lot for taking the time and welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Adi. It's been a while since I got to do something like this. So it's good to, always chat about growth with you. And yeah, thank you for having me on board.
Awesome. Let's talk about what does Phasio do? Like tell us in 60 seconds.
Phasio, in a nutshell, is the Shopify for manufacturing. What we do is we digitize manufacturers, especially SME or precision manufacturers, like think gears, think bolts, think fixtures, and think jigs, right? What happens is creating or responding to requests for quotes is painful. And what we do is we have created our own algorithm for people to upload 3D files or 2D files to figure out the cost of manufacturing the part and streamline the process from getting the order to fulfilling it, including shipping and payment and even any other thing with regards to manufacturing. So that's what we
Got it.
do in a nutshell.
Shopify for manufacturing. I love that soundbite. So Raman, how big is the team right now?
We are a team of 9,
Oh
fully
wow,
remote,
that's
distributed.
grown a lot since we last
Yeah,
spoke. Yeah.
well, it's almost doubled since we last spoke.
Nice.
But yeah, a team of 9. I am traveling between Berlin and Singapore. My co-founder is also doing the same, and the majority of the team is distributed between Berlin and India.
Got it. And how is the team structured across different functions and who's looking after growth?
The team is structured, so we have 6 devs and engineers, including my co-founder, if we consider him as that, and me and 2 others on growth and sales. And we also work with a contractor once in a while who helps us with like website redesign, SEO, so on and so forth. So me and my co-founder take care of like the bulk of the customer success and growth post sales and also like content. But we have like 2 spearfishers for our sales along with me.
Spearfishers. And how long have you been working on Phasio now, Raman?
So Phasio is a bit more than 2 years old now, but we started off with a completely different value prop and tool. I think we've discussed this before. We were building something for 3D printing, digitization. And while the idea was great, we had no paying customers. So we had to pivot into something which people were willing to put money on before we write a line of code. And that's
Yeah.
basically what the current version of Phasio turned out to be.
Yeah. No, I love the fact that you're going after this problem. I think you're among all the founders I know, which is like, in the high hundreds now, you're the only 3D printing metallurgist by trade who's come into this.
Not a lot of us.
At least not that I've met. So Raman, so you mentioned you've been at it for 2 years. So how long did it take you from the day you started till the day you closed your first paying customer? And how was that journey like?
That's a very funny story, right? So I told you we pivoted our solution. So when we started off, we created this whole like manufacturing OS for 3D printing. And while it was great on paper, we also got like, a lot of VCs excited because I come from that space. I published papers in that space. And even my co-founder has worked on like 3D printing of like lunar regolite, which is like basically lunar soil, right?
Right.
At the European Space Station. So it felt like we were solving the right thing. But what we realized was that problem statement was very small and addressed a very small segment of customers. We
Right.
could get like 5 customers from but then they were basically GE, Boeing, Airbus, Rocket Labs, and maybe like another Fortune 500 company.
Number of
But
customers was tiny. Yeah.
number of customers was tiny, and they were the only ones willing to pay for it, right?
Right.
Everyone else who still had 3D printers was still managing a farm. Farm means multiple 3D printers in one place, like for 20, 30, 40. They still didn't want to spend on software
Right.
like these. So that's when we, around like 1 year into building our old tool, we ran into the issues that nobody was willing to pay for the platform. And there are 2 problems, right? Either I am bad at sales, which, it's fair. I come from a research background.
Don't think that's the case, but anyways.
Like when you're doing a post-mortem, right? This was
Yeah.
either it was I was bad at sales, or B, this is not a hair on fire problem, right? Or this is not a burning issue for our customers.
Right.
So that's when we pivoted. So around April of 2022, me and my co-founder had like a decision where we're going to get like 4 customers to pay for the platform even without writing a line of code. And if we do,
Right.
we're going to start it. And that's basically it, right? So we went back to all the people we had talked to. So we started May 2021. But in April 2022, we went back to all the 30, 40 different manufacturers we talked to and asked them, hey, we are building this. Are you
Right.
interested? And we got 2 purchase orders on the first day. Writing a
Without
line
writing
of
any code.
Yeah, yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
So that's when we realized that we are solving an actual problem, and that
Yeah.
this is, while it's not the perfect product market fit at that point, it was more like, okay, this space is what we have to solve. And that was the early version of Phasio. So that it took us almost a year to get even someone to give us a purchase order.
No, I mean, props to you guys for persevering. And I think it's quite a telling feature that if you've landed on a real problem when people are like willing to pay you anything, even for the, probabilistic chance that you'll build something that takes away that pain. Okay. And Raman, how has that evolved now? Like, how are you reaching customers today? Like, what are the channels that you're using?
So we have tested a lot of things and they worked at different stages. So the first thing we did was we did a lot of email outreach, cold outbound emails.
Right.
And I think they're good, but especially when we're trying to get our first 10 customers, we got all of them through cold outbound. But then we started hitting a wall because we were not reaching the right person, or we were not creating the urgency to like close very fast on emails, because we're still doing customer discovery, right? So it was mostly like we were jumping on calls and figuring out what we're solving and getting better at solving it. But when we started to do actual sales, we tried two things. The first thing is we did automatic email outbound, like with sequences and templates and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think we had the worst conversion rate.
Interesting.
So when we did, very manual, very thought out, very spear phishing kind of, like addressing every customer really well, we had a 40% response rate and like a 70% demo to onboarding conversion rate. So it was really good to like our first 30 customers. But when we started doing it at scale, it was more of a deterrent than it was an advantage when we did like outbound, like continuous outbound, which was at start of this year. And then especially cold email with templates. Then we switched to cold calling. And cold calling has been our biggest growth driver right now. So we're doing like a classic SDR setup, which is we call people, we have a script, and we try to get them on a demo as fast as possible. So right now we have a 58% cold call to demo book conversion rate. And while our conversion rate from demo booked to onboarding is at 60% now, not at 70 anymore, it is still a bit better in terms of the setup, right? Because we are getting more people to go onto the demos now. So that's what has changed. So as we are doing cold call every day, all day now.
Got it. And how does that setup look like? Like, how do you typically get the phone numbers? Where do you have the resources? Like, geographically, the cold callers, are they based like within your target market, or is it sort of outsourced to a different location? How does that work? Like, I'm very curious to know.
So the cold calling, so we only target two markets. One is India, one is Australia, right? So these are the two markets which we target. And cold calling for India, we have one person, and for Australia, we have two people. So I juggle between India and Australia, but Jagdish in India, he does only Indian customers. And Ludwig, one of my German employees, he does it for Australia, and I support both of them.
So,
calling.
Raman, I have a quick interjection. So for a founder, say a first-time founder who's just considering testing out cold calling as a channel, how would you recommend they should go about that?
First, get a very thick skin. I think people forget that I've got cold calls from credit card companies before, and I know how brutal I can be. Now I empathize with them rather than anything else. I think the best way for us is we just had to do it. There was no script when we started off. We just had to get used to the fact that we were doing 10 cold calls a week. We just set a number threshold. Our initial goal was always that we, for 2 or 3 weeks, just do cold calls. Doesn't matter if we booked any demos, doesn't matter if we got any new customers, just getting used to the fact that we had to do cold calls, right? Once that became second nature, and once you're gone, like if you do 10 calls or 20 calls a week for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you have heard almost everything which you can in a spectrum, right? Like people who are interested, people who cut the call when you're speaking, you see everything. Once you're used to that and you get desensitized, you can start creating a process around it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we started doing, which was we first got used to cold calling. I'm still bad at it because I still feel very personal when people attack the company. But my reps, they're incentivized to just get people on calls, right? So they get people on demos, right? So the initial idea was get the amount of calls in. The second idea was book the amount of demos. Now we have moved on to like not only booking demos, but conversion and onboarding. And then we'll start doing forecasting on how we want to hit and what are the targets we want to hit month on month.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're just starting out and you, on day one, you set a target for your team, like, okay, I want X $1,000 of revenue converted this month, I think you're setting them up for failure because like if you've not done that, if you've not put in the legwork for figuring out that founder-led sales process and, putting in the repetitions yourself, creating a script that works, figuring out the process, as you said, I think that's key in eventually setting up something that's scalable and then evolving the goals as you crack each successive stage of that pipeline. So that makes perfect sense. So Raman, something that I really admire you for, and it's something that I see less of these days, is Like, tell us about the importance of being physically close to the customers and to the markets you're serving. Because I knew that you moved from Singapore to Germany to be closer to some of your early customers. So tell us about that experience and how that has shaped your outlook on serving customers.
I think like if you're selling B2B, you have to be where you're selling. Early stage companies, you're not only selling a product, you're
Yeah.
also understanding your customers, right? And sure, we can sell it via Zoom, but when we get a customer who's onboarded, we can actually go to their facility and figure out what they're doing with our platform. And I think that's the most interesting thing. Our industry is very backward. They're still using Excel, right? They're not digitally native. So I can't get a lot of data, which let's say, developer tools or, other CRM tools out there can get. So the
Yeah.
only data I can get is if manufacturers are using the platform, and if yes, how are they using it? And the thing is, manufacturers are not in, swanky cities. They're, outside in rural areas. And I spent time in India with manufacturers, outside of Chennai, outside of Bangalore. I spent times outside in Berlin, outside of Germany.
Right.
Just being there to not only sell but also understand them, because
Right.
once I understand them, I know what to sell, right? Because I need to know I'm solving a problem for them, that it feels worthwhile for them and us to work on this together. Because I think people forget that sales, as long as we go back to we are solving a problem for them rather than this is the revenue I'm bringing for the company, we change the way our customers look at us, right? Because we
Right.
are an ally rather than line item.
That isn't just a vendor. No, I
Yeah.
totally resonate with that. And I think that's like so important. I think if you're physically there and you see your customer, engaging with your product in the wild, you can have such high resolution insights. And it's almost like, you're learning in 4K versus learning in 360p through like
Yeah.
some just product data interfaces.
Dylan Field from Figma. Uber was their biggest customer, and apparently he spent 8 months at Uber office figuring out how the designers were using Figma.
Yeah.
And that's when they started monetizing enterprises. Before that, they didn't even monetize enterprises because he needed to know how multiple teams work on designing for a large architecture like Uber. And the best way he did it was spend time at the office, right? With the designers, learning them, being a pain, but also being very perceptive of what problem they're solving.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally relate to that. I mean, I think like product level analytics are very important. They're key, but the resolution of learning you have when you're looking at just the data that's flowing in there versus like when you're face to face with your customer, ideally multiple customers, and seeing how they interact, and there's like a lot of stuff that's not captured, and you get to like really read between the lines of how people are using the product in different ways. Okay, so Raman, with all this wisdom you've accumulated now, if you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself regarding getting customers?
Regarding getting customers is you have to know that they're going to pay. And talking about commercials upfront, even though however annoying or however, like as people, right? Like we think, oh, we can do a freemium model, or how, we can get a free trial, we can get a case study. In the end, the only thing which moves the needle is if you're getting, at least in B2B SaaS, you need to get a customer to pay. If you're getting them to
Yeah,
pay, it might not be the exact problem which you're going to create that unicorn out of, but it is a step in the right direction. And money on the table moves things much better, right? Because we've tried trials. People don't use the platform. They don't give us the right feedback. They give us feature requests, which are kind of pointless and useless, right? But when we ask them to pay, even if they are not using the platform, we understand that they are not the right kind of users we want. But if they are using the platform and asking for features, they tend to almost always, all the paying customers who are active on the platform tend to always give us the right direction of what we need to build, rather than like just a feature requests, which will evolve us into a feature factory, which we don't want to be, right?
yeah, it's a nightmare. And I think, yeah, like, and I've been guilty, very guilty of this as well, like starting out. There's this almost like fear and like baked in resistance against asking people to pay for your product on day one for whatever reason. I think we should fight against it and ask people to pay. If anything, it helps you to like number one get buy-in from your customer as well, because people when they pay for something they really evaluate like, is this a want or a need?
Yeah.
And especially in like times like this where it's there's a funding crunch and the macro is not good, like you'll know very quickly if what you're selling is a want or a need based on if people are willing to pay and how much they're willing to pay.
Right, it's the biggest. I think the pay no pay barrier is a very hard one. And when the zero interest rate phenomena, we've read so much about, how should I put it, product-led growth, or any, like, we can talk a lot about how
Yeah.
Figma did it, or how anyone else did it, or even Slack did it. But here's the fun fact, right now, any software which people are buying, they're buying if only and only if they actually need it. And so
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
solving a very pertinent problem if that is
Yeah.
the base.
Not to give a spicy take or stir up any sort of hornets' nests here, but I've recently been talking to a couple of founders. I've had like 2, 3 versions of this conversation where
Mhm.
founders who were like, big proponents of PLG are now saying like, we're sort of not seeing the sort of results we were hoping. And I think we have to shift back to, good old direct outreach and sales led growth. So it should be interesting to see how that evolves. Have you guys, on that note, have you tried product led and what was your experience with that?
No, the reason we haven't tried product led is two things. One, we're still doing pricing discovery. So we have some customers who are paying $100, some customers who are paying 1,000, some customers who are willing to pay 10, 12,000 who are still in the pipeline. So we're not very comfortable just having like a self sign up tool yet on the website, because ours is a slightly complex product. So we need to spend a bit more time with our customers just figuring out their problems and needs. But
Yeah.
every customer who gives us feature requests is a paying customer. So no more like, it's like, whether
Yeah.
they're paying $100 or
Yeah.
$1,000, that's a different problem.
Raman's customers, if you're listening, please forget he said all this. You guys are all paying the same thing, leave this guy alone.
They all have different features which they get, right?
Yeah, I see. Got it,
We
got it, got it,
we
got it.
still have a tiering system in the platform. So
Makes sense.
it's more from like what we are discovering our customers and our customers' needs and how we can best serve them, right? So that's why we are still not tried product led. But here's the thing, right? One of the biggest product led companies I know, which is Brex, I recently talked on SaaStr, like Europe, yesterday or day before, where they said that 50% of their revenue comes from account executives, 30% comes from SDRs, and the
Yeah.
rest 20% comes from website submissions.
I think, like zero interest rate periods aside and booming periods aside, like I think when it comes to brass tacks of growth, you need, at least for most products with a high enough ACV, you do need that solid base of SDRs and AEs who are sort of, reliably following playbooks.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, after a certain stage, I'm not saying at pre-seed you need this, but once you've discovered a, reliable growth flywheel that's sales led, you do need that to continue to, meet and exceed revenue targets.
Yeah.
Okay, so Raman, let's go to the fun bit of this conversation. So I want to know, what is the most ridiculous thing you've done in the name of growth, and what was the outcome of that?
The most ridiculous thing is we try to pay people to use our software.
That's crazy. What happened?
Actually, people were kind of taken aback in our industry. So, like in fintech, you have cashbacks, right? Or like sign up, like you had the whole PayPal did the, you sign up, you get $10 for free or $5 for free. And then people signed up and started using it. We tried like, you jump on board and you get $100 Amazon gift card kind of thing. We onboarded like 3 or 4 customers with that, not a lot. We reached out to a lot, but more often than not, that wasn't the selling point. What we felt it was creating was actually more hindrance than any benefit, right? Because we are in a market which is, although it is growing, there are some competitors there. It's just the way we think about the product is different. And so they know that our competitors, A, charge more than us, and B, have been there for 10 more years, and C, they don't give free things on sign up. So they were actually thinking that we are not even a legitimate company and we are trying to like, swindle them or like cheat them out of their own money, right? I jumped on a call with like this Italian customer, like Italian prospect, who said that, are we going to steal his Bitcoins? So
Well, that escalated. Did not see that coming.
yeah.
So Raman, since you're servicing customers in across like multiple geographies, can you unpack some of the differences you've seen with regards to outbound across geographies? Like, is it that like LinkedIn works better or email works better for some regions and cold calling works better? Like, would love to know your experience and how that changes across different places.
So for example, Germany, there are 2 things which work really well. One is partnerships, like reseller models. They work really, really well. And the second thing is LinkedIn, but not LinkedIn in the way you're thinking, which is like LinkedIn outreach, but more like you have a LinkedIn presence and you start posting.
I mean, I was thinking like cat memes, but anyways.
Yeah. So we attended like 2 webinars, right? Like one of Ludwig, our employee, great guy, did 2 webinars in complete German about the product, right? And that gave him like 10 or 12 leads, like warm leads on the platform. And this was published on LinkedIn with like, not even 100 people attending, right? So we saw that in Europe, there's a very trust-based system. So they like to see And that webinar was with like a big organization. We were invited to that because we had some connections. So it was a happenstance for that conversation. And so be- because of that, we got like 10 different like customers on that, 10 different warm leads on that webinar. Australia, cold calls and emails work really well. Like I think cold calls
Interesting.
even work better than emails because they're so used to being sold on the phone that
Right.
as long as you follow a script, people are willing to listen to you and jump on a demo. So we found that work really well in Australia. Second is emails. People still respond to emails. They're very direct, so they don't care about anything with regards to like, oh, you're a startup, we'll support you, we'll pay you. I'm happy to
Right.
like jump on a call and figure out what you're doing. They see a lot of value in that, and they would like to support that kind of like, as long as you're solving their problem.
Right. Right.
India is very interesting because the purchasing power is different. Although in manufacturing, I would say that it doesn't really matter because a lot of people do 500,000 to 1 million a year in revenue, even in India. But the problem is they like to see if their competitors are using the tool. So we've had inbounds where people who were competitors to our initial users in India ended up coming on board or like talking to us because they saw us on their competitor's website.
I love that. Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, so for us, if you have to like grow in like a region like India, for example, we have to just get like the top players in like different markets to convince them to come onto the platform, because that will create second order effect of like other people to come on board. It's our hypothesis, we're still working on it to figure it out, but we've seen this common trend that India is very, they look at that FOMO heavy, or like if my competitor is using it, I can use it, in a way.
Yeah. Got it. No, that is very interesting. Maybe something to do with like India being a low trust country at the moment. So people like sort of resort to, okay, whatever a bigger brand is using, sort of, using icons as proxies for trust
Yeah.
and reliability.
Yeah.
I think it's also one of the reasons that, using established influencers in India works really well for growth in B2C, on the B2C side. Got it. So Raman, I have a serious question for you now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall a moment where you had to sort of admit that a growth strategy that you tried failed, and then you had to admit that to your team? And how did that go?
So one of the growth strategies which we tried, as I told you, which was also funny, was we tried to like get paid users onto the platform to just test it out, right? We're trying to brute force it. It wasn't as painful, but it was more like we realized that that was not working very early on. But the second one, which sort of stopped working, was it's the way I used to deal with like outbound email automation. So I was trying to send out automated outbound emails, and truth be told, we sent 150 emails and we had 2% open rate. Like
That's, yeah.
it was
Dude, if you
abysmal.
need help with outbound, we should talk. I think we're able to consistently drive like 7-8% plus reply rates for almost all of our clients. So
Absolutely right.
you should look into that.
Um,
I just thought of something funny. Like you mentioned just a little while ago that you were paying customers to try the product. And technically they are paid customers. You paid them.
yeah, no,
So
that was the way we would have gone, but it would have been a part of my CAC strategy. But
yeah.
so the thing is, when we did very, very concentrated outbound prospecting and outbound, we've had, like, as I told you, we had 40% like response rates, right? And 20% of them jumped on a demo. Like it was
Right.
insane. And then when we tried something automatic, the moment we went automatic, we went to abysmal rates, to the point that for 2 months, when we tried it out by brute forcing it, we got 0 customers, 0 demos. And
Yeah.
that shook us to the core, because it was like, what is going on here? Why are we not getting any demos? And the
Yeah.
responses were lukewarm at best. And that's where we
Yeah.
shifted to cold calling, because we wanted to get the decision maker on the call. But it'll also, once we realized that at scale, cold calling seems to work better in our industry than mass email outbound.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key insight about emailing at scale is that you can only, like, you have to start with super personalized when you're experimenting. And it's only when you discover a consistent persona that, really wants, needs, resonates with your product, then you can scale it up. But it cannot be at the cost of like it sounding salesy or less authentic.
Yeah.
So it still needs to sound authentic, but now that you've discovered this niche of people that you can speak to at once, you can scale it up gradually. So
Yeah.
it's like, like personalization may go down a little bit, but not that much where you feel like, okay, this email could literally have been sent to anybody. Like it should still speak to the customer in some way.
Yeah.
Okay, so Raman, if you had to pick one, digital tool or SaaS product that has been a game changer for you in terms of running your company, which one would that be?
One would be definitely our CRM. So we use Close right now. I think that's pretty powerful, pretty good. A close second is HubSpot. The only reason we have stopped using HubSpot is it's expensive after the first year.
90% discount time bomb, right?
Yeah, it's insane. But HubSpot is powerful. When I created a whole
Yeah.
workflow around HubSpot, I just felt it clicking really well. So if you can afford it, afford HubSpot. Otherwise, Close is also pretty good. And I think CRM has absolutely worked best for us. Like, I think investing early in a CRM, I would say don't go to Notion, don't do any of the
Yeah.
fancy stuff. Use a CRM tool, get used to it, because if you're used to it, you can train salespeople on it. And if you can train salespeople on it, you can create a process around it. And that's why.
No, I think CRM is such a. I think there is some resistance at the early stages to invest in one, but as you said, right, if you're at all in a field where relationships are valued and where it's not just the number of prospects, but there's like a limited number of them and you need to, over time build that relationship out, it's like so crucial that you have it as part of your revenue ops process.
Yeah, yeah.
And Raman, so this was the tool. Now let's talk about what's your favorite resource, whether that's a podcast or whether that's a book, when it comes to startup growth.
I love SaaStr. So SaaStr is Jason Lemkin, god of SaaS is what I
Yeah.
like to call it. I love his podcast and the talks he gives and like the panels he hosts, because a lot of the companies are companies we know and we look up to, like Vanta, like for example, Launch Darkly, Viva, and you can see, right, like Twilio, their average revenue per click is like $0.00085,
Yeah.
and then they also have Viva, which is doing 10 million a year in revenue per customer, right? So you can
Yeah.
see that difference. But then in the end, you learn that it's the same thing, how they're all thought about growth. And the biggest
Yeah.
hurdle for B2B SaaS is getting to the 1 million ARR. The moment you reach
Exactly.
there is the way you're going to do it. And I love hearing that those takes on how to get to 1 million ARR, how different companies did it, how long some companies did it. Like UiPath took 10 years, but they're doing like a billion ARR right now, right? And like in our industry, Procore, it's not the same, but it's like manufacturing. They were in construction, so Procore took 10 years to go from 0 to 4 million in revenue, but took 10 years to go from 4 million to 600 million in revenue.
No,
Reading
I
that.
agree with you that 1 million is a tough ceiling to crack for any early stage or even slightly later stage business. Raman, so that brings me to the last point or last question I want to ask you today. It's something I love asking all founders. So I know that before startups, you were in academia.
Yep.
So can you share a moment where you questioned your career choice in startups? And then what was it that made you stick with it?
I think as founders, we all have good days and bad days and worse days. I think there was a lot of time where we had, especially when we started off the first year, when we weren't selling anything. I think that shook me to the core, because like I'm not doing this out of anything. Like, there are better and easier career paths to have a very fulfilling
Yeah.
life. I would say that being a founder is one of the worst. Someone said that it's like eating glass and enjoying it.
Staring into the abyss. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do accept that. And there were times where it was very hard for us to, like, at least personally for me, when we were not doing sales, we lost like a couple of big contracts which were supposed to come through, and those times I did question like a lot. I have only published 3 papers, but I have almost 100 citations on them. So
Nice.
I've been very good at quality over quantity
Yeah.
as I was growing. But I also knew that startups and tech is where I want to be. I didn't know if that product which we were building at that point was the right direction, but we had to make those mistakes there to learn what we're doing right now. And the mistakes we're going to make are going to be different, but it just gave me a better idea. So like those times, like before our pivot, I think was one of my biggest challenging points, because we had money in the bank. We had 1.5 years of runway, right? I wasn't like, there was not like, oh, we're going to die tomorrow. It's just that I felt no purpose because we had no customers. Like, coming on board every day, trying to send a few emails, trying to convert a few people in the pipeline, and not happening months out is painful.
Yeah.
And it is worse than being in a position of, like, I think when you have no money in the bank, it's a very different feeling. Or when
Yeah.
you just raise money, it's a different feeling. But when you have money, but you have put like 6, 8, 9 months of work and you have zero output, I think that's the worst. And I felt like those were the times where I was questioning a lot, like especially when crypto companies were hiring like crazy.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Raman. Yeah, for listeners, Raman is also known to, place the occasional contrarian trade in derivatives and in cryptos. So maybe on some other podcast we can ask Raman more about that.
Yeah.
So Raman, like that, just what you said, it resonated with me, and I want to ask you, like, as founders, what sort of support structures do you rely on to, keep your sanity and keep that resilience up and continue to show up every day?
I think different people have different elements, what works for them.
Yeah.
For me, things which work, I have a very good co-founder. He's a very solid co-founder, but he's also much more emotionally level than I am.
Yeah.
So generally him being there helps me a lot. And I also attribute like a lot of our fights to also get better at what we're building, or me getting better as a person is attributed to that. I think that helped, having a very solid co-founder who also understood the pain. Because to give some background to the people hearing, my co-founder took like a 75% pay cut or 80% pay cut to start a startup with me. So, it's not easy when you're, living the high life and then you have to give all of that up to,
Yeah.
work for peanuts and, living in a very small room in Singapore. It takes a lot. And so I respect him for that. Also, like, my team was also very upbeat. They didn't feel the same things I was feeling. So that helped a lot. Like, the team still had high motivation because they were still delivering and they were still seeing some usage because we had some free trial customers. So that helped. And like the founder network you have, right? Like, Adi, you're still part of it. Like, we all know the good and the bad about each other, right? Because in
Yeah.
the end, fundraising high only stays for like a week or two, or maybe a month at max.
Maybe a
Afterward,
month.
yeah. But afterwards, you're like, now I have to actually use the money usefully, right? But then talking about that with people, talking about that with like our network, our community, and trying to like have something which helps us during the downtime. Like, I love reading, I like playing video games, all of that, while isn't the best sometimes, but like just disconnecting from like your work and every day helps.
Yeah, I think just having at least one thing that you can switch off work to go and do that thing really helps. It can be anything. I think for some people, it's just hanging out with friends.
Yep.
Some people like partying, reading, sports, meditation, whatever it is that helps you sort of disconnect for a little while, refresh. That really helps. Cool. Awesome. Raman, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Sure.
If we have anybody who's in the 3D printing space and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Raman at phase.io, or feel free to like go to our website, phas.io, Phasio.
Got it. And also follow Raman on LinkedIn. Are you active? Yeah, I think you're fairly active.
I'm decently active. It's not the same kind of active as like thought influencers put, but
Is that a dig at me, Raman? But anyways.
yeah, I have the liberty to do that.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. All right, Raman. Thanks a lot for taking the time.
As long as
And
you
I
don't
really
do
enjoyed the
chat GPT things,
Yeah. No. Miss me with that shit. All right, dude. Cheers.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.